Well, hello again everybody, and as you can see on the bench today we've got this mystery package, and this package has come all the way from the US of A. So of course, unsurprisingly, after purchasing this, it actually got shipped from the USA in really just 2 or 3 days, and then it sat for 3 or 4 weeks at the Hermes sorting office, which is about par for the course. So the question is, have Hermes managed to actually destroy it in the last few miles of its journey? It really wouldn't surprise me if they have. Now there's really no point in asking you if anybody can guess what it is, because you're not going to be able to guess. Can you see through the packaging there? I can see something, it says something like radio, something new advanced, talking house. Does that mean anything to you? Anybody heard of a talking house?
My wife's not feeling well.
Oh, sorry to hear it. What's the trouble?
She's got the shingles.
Well, I've got to admit, if I was shipping something from America, I would have put a bit more bubble wrap around it than this, because yeah, things get damaged very easily, but I can't see any damage so far. The outer packaging wasn't damaged, and the box doesn't look too crushed, so I'm hopeful that this thing has survived intact, but we will see very shortly, won't we? Well, as you can see, what we've got on the bench today is a talking house radio transmitter. Now, I'm fairly sure that those of you that are watching from America will probably know what this is, but I suspect that none of my UK viewers will have heard of one of these talking house radio transmitters, because these aren't something that I've ever heard of being used in the UK. So the idea behind these talking house transmitters is that they will actually transmit a pre-recorded message, and the idea was, if your house was for sale, you would actually set up the pre-recorded message to give some information about your particular house, you know, maybe how much it costs, how many bedrooms it had, and you know, stuff like that, all that typical information you would get from an estate agent. So I suspect what would happen is that these were actually designed to be picked up on your car radio. So if you were driving around, and maybe you were in the market to buy a new house, as you were driving around your local area, your car radio would actually pick up the transmissions and would describe where these houses were for sale, and then you could park outside the house, and it would describe to you all the information about the house, etc. Now, I don't think we had them in the UK, but apparently these were quite popular in the US of A. So in theory, this unit that I've bought is meant to be new old stock, so it hasn't been used, but we'll have to see when we unbox it. Now, the price of this, I paid, it was about £80, but by the time we'd put the import taxes on and the shipping cost, I think it probably worked out nearer to £150, so it wasn't exactly a cheap item. But the reason that I did spend that bit of extra money is because these are meant to be very, very high quality and produce very good audio content. Now, I don't know if any of you have noticed, certainly here in the UK, local AM stations are absolutely dying a death. It seems like they're switching off the old AM and medium wave broadcast stations. Almost one a day seems to be turned off. And I thought pretty soon there's not going to be any radio stations to be left to listen to on my vintage wirelesses. So I wanted to buy something like this, so that, yeah, so we can listen to vintage wirelesses that I've got installed around my house, and, you know, rebroadcast maybe the latest digital radio stations or MP3s or, you know, anything like that. Maybe we could even connect a Bluetooth module to it, and we can then stream, you know, all sorts of content from my phone or my iPad, something like that. Okay, let's get it out of the box. So it looks like there's a couple of things in the packaging. So it looks like we've got quite a substantial, and from the weight of it, we've got a traditional power supply here. And I'm expecting this, of course, because it's American, I think it's going to be, I think it's 120 volts in the USA, isn't it? So unfortunately we can't actually just plug this into a British plug socket, because it won't fit, and it's of course the wrong voltage. So we probably won't be able to use this right away, although I do have one of these American step-down transformers. So what I think we'll do is we'll plug it in off that. When we've actually figured out exactly what the output voltage is from this, we can go ahead and we'll replace this with a UK wall wart or yeah, something similar, a power pack. Of course, really what we want to look at though is the main unit itself. Now, it seems to be about the size of one of those set-top boxes, which I don't know why they chose to make it that size. You know, it's probably bigger than it needs to be. I'm just looking inside it. I can see through the top cover here quite a substantial circuit board inside it. Looks as though it's got a processor in there, so yeah, maybe it employs some form of digital tuning. I've just noticed we don't appear to have a manual with it. I'm just going to check the outer packaging, make sure I haven't missed it. So no, amazingly enough, it hasn't come with a manual. So looking at the condition of it, I can see a small dent in the top of it there. Still got, ooh, very satisfying tear off protecting the front of it. And let's just see what it says on the front here. So it's got in here radio transmitter, quartz lock crystal tuning, and it looks as though we can set the AM broadcast frequency, and we can press play, record or pause. Because I believe that this thing, what you can actually do to it, you can actually connect an external audio input to it, but what this has also got, it's got a very basic memory inside it. Now I think these were made probably back in the 80s, so the cost of RAM and memory was quite expensive back in the day, so I think you can only actually record a message on here up to about 30 seconds long. So like today you could have hundreds of hours of audio, probably thousands of hours on a memory card or a memory stick. This can actually only pre-record about 30 seconds of audio, but we can plug an external audio source into it. So let's just take a quick look at the back. So it's got two possible antenna outputs. It's got what they call basic or outdoor. So at the moment it's actually set to basic, so just got a length of wire which is going to be our radio transmitting antenna, and that's just a piece of just seems like a piece of flexible stranded wire, nothing special. It's got a security lock here to stop somebody running off with it. Now I believe that these could actually transmit quite a long way, but to actually transmit as far as it possibly can, you would connect a specialist outdoor antenna to it on this TNC connector. I don't think we're going to be using that, but I can see that we can select between the basic antenna, which is this wire, or the outdoor antenna via this switch here. It says it'll play a two-part message, so you can play part 1 or part 2. We've got a line level input here with, it says it's got an automatic gain control, and it wants an audio level input of 500 millivolts peak to peak. Yeah, that is about line level, isn't it? Which I usually class as about 0.6 of a volt. Got a microphone input. So we've also got a power connector here, so it says custom power input, 120 volt VAC. Well, I don't think you would connect 120 volts to it. It's obviously designed to be powered up off that wall wart. So underneath that it says 18 volts DC, and it's one of those barrel connectors, and it's got a centre positive of the barrel connector, which is nice to see, because it's always evil, isn't it, when they make the outside shield, when they make that positive like they do on Roberts radios. That's always very scary. So I've just noticed it's got a volume control here, and it says on that volume control must be off when using microphone to avoid feedback. So I'm guessing that this little grill here must be an internal speaker. So when you record your preset message that's got the information about the house that you want to sell, you'd record that by plugging this microphone in. What you want to do is, so you don't get feedback, that horrible howling affair, what you do is you turn off the external speaker. But I guess you want to just proofread your message. You want to hear it before you start transmitting it. So what you can probably do is you must be able to turn the speaker on and listen to the message that you've just pre-recorded. But I think that we're mainly going to be using this line input, so I intend to connect something like an MP3 player to it, or maybe one of those MP3 players that's got a built-in Bluetooth. That's my idea anyway. So just looking at the display again, it says remote antenna in use when lit. So I guess when we flick the switch to, what was it on here? When we switch it to outdoor, I'm guessing that this remote antenna light probably comes on. Press play, maybe to start playing the pre-recorded messages. And then we've got AM broadcast frequency, so we can lower the frequency or we can increase the frequency, and then we can record or pause. So yeah, so that all seems fairly basic. Well, I just suggest that the first thing we do is I'm going to plug this into my American transformer that I've got under my bench here, and let's try plugging it in and see if it fires up. So just looking at the various labels on it, it's got the model of the transmitter here, which says it's a TH5 AM. It's an AM transmitter, and it works between a frequency of 520 to 1700 kilohertz, and it's got a serial number on there which is 260516, and then there's serial numbers also in the form of a barcode here which is 260516. Now it's got this FCC ID number on it, and I'm guessing that maybe that's a manufacturing date there. So this says DBL5LTT 98. So I'm guessing that this was manufactured in 1998, or certainly that's my guess. Now, interestingly enough, although I bought this from America, of course, nothing's new under the sun. It actually says it's manufactured in China, exclusively for the Radio Technologies LCC, Glenville, Illinois, US patent number 6295-443, other patents pending, so we better be careful not to infringe their patent. Well, I've got to admit, it's actually a little bit strange for me, because most of the equipment I like to buy and own and work on, you know, it's from the 1940s, 1950s and 60s. So this is a piece of equipment which is clearly over 20 years old, and it kind of makes me wonder, should we do anything to it before we power it up for the first time? Because in some ways it seems like the more modern capacitors, the more modern electrolytics seem to be more problematic and worse than some of the early ones. So, you know, should we be actually switching this on and trying to reform it? I've got to admit, I don't know. I think I'm just going to plug it in and throw caution to the wind and just give it a try. Okay, well, I've plugged in the power supply, and nothing is smoking so far. Let's just get a voltmeter and just check what's coming out of our connector here. Okay, so it is 18.8 volts. Yes, it is DC. Okay, it's got 0.5 volts of AC ripple on it, but it's clearly a DC power supply, and just to confirm, the centre of our barrel connector is positive, so I need to buy an 18 volt power supply, which is that a common one? It doesn't seem like a particularly common voltage setting, that, does it? 18. Okay, I'm going to plug it in now. Ah, right, okay, I just heard a motor running then, and it was saying the word cal, so that's interesting. One thing that these do have is they've actually got a built-in automatic tuning unit, so I could hear a motor running then, so I'm guessing that that was the ATU we could hear. It was probably some form of variable inductor. Now, I've got no idea if we actually have to do anything to make it calibrated. Maybe that just meant it was going for its calibration routine, and it seems to be set at the moment, as we've just switched it on, to 1670 kilohertz. So I guess what I need to do now is get a radio and tune it into 1670 kilohertz and see if we're getting any quietening.
Congratulations! This talking house transmitter is a powerful marketing tool. We put this message on your transmitter as part of our quality control testing. You can adjust the volume of this internal speaker using the dial on the back of the transmitter. Please note, the volume control for the internal speaker will not affect the volume of your broadcast. Anytime you plug in the transmitter, always remember to stretch the antenna out first before you plug it in. That way the transmitter tunes itself for maximum range. The motor sound you may have heard after plugging it in was the transmitter tuning itself. The most important thing you need to do in order to get good reception with the talking house transmitter is called an outdoor frequency test. You do this test to determine the frequencies that will work best for you in your area. Your instruction manual contains step-by-step instructions on how to do this test. Finally, when you go to install a transmitter at a location, remember that glass blocks AM radio signals. So please do not place a transmitter directly in front of a window. If you have any questions, just call us toll-free at 800-444.
Well, unfortunately I can hear that our radio transmitter is a little bit off frequency, so what I think we will do is we'll go ahead and it looks as though we can just press these up and down buttons. So the maximum frequency that I can put this up to on here is, well, it's 1652, so let's just see if we can actually adjust this down a little bit.
Antenna out first before you plug it in.
Okay, so it looks as though it goes down in 10 kilohertz steps. Oh, and it's retuning itself. So it obviously goes quiet while it retunes.
Congratulations. This talking house transmitter is a powerful marketing tool. We put this message on your transmitter as part of our quality control testing.
Well, it's actually a few days later now, and as you can see, my power adapter's arrived, and just looking at it, this one is made by a company called Dixie Tree, and I think it's just one of these generic kind of rebadged by everybody that probably comes out of some nameless factory made in China. So looking at the specification for it, it's described as being a switching adapter, so it hasn't got a transformer in it. It is a switch mode power supply. The model number is a 5J180-15028. Now it's got an input specification of 100 to 240 volts AC at 50 to 60 Hertz and 0.8 amps input, which seems actually quite high. I suspect it isn't that high. And it's got an output here of 18 volts DC at 1.5 amps. Now I'm not exactly sure how much power this talking house transmitter actually takes. I've not tried to measure it yet. So taking a look at the original power supply that comes with it, it really doesn't tell us very much about it. It doesn't even state what voltage it is, but it does say custom RLE power supply. Using any other power supply may damage the transmitter and will void your warranty. It's a TH2000, caution for indoor use only, but it doesn't tell us what the voltage is, and also it doesn't tell us what the wattage or the current is. But I think that's fair enough. I mean, I'm guessing it's probably less than 1.5 amps. So this switch mode power supply should be okay. But it is a switch mode power supply, and of course there lies a problem which I'm going to demonstrate to you. Now, I didn't choose a switch mode power supply by choice. It was simply that it was the only power supply that you can actually buy these days. There's not a lot of people using transformers in traditional power supplies anymore, for the simple reason that transformers are more expensive to make, but the biggest problem with them is they are heavy, and that weight means that they're expensive to ship, where this is actually, well, I would say that this switch mode power supply is at least a quarter of the weight of this traditional transformer supply. So yeah, that's why you're going to really find switch mode power supplies everywhere these days. So yeah, it's not great, it's a switch mode. Now the other problem that I had is probably just a problem unique to my workshop, in that when I tried to put it into my plug socket here, it's actually so deep, the body on this, there's not enough gap between the plug socket and the bottom of my bench, but we can't claim the power supply for that. But the real problem with it is, yeah, the fact it's a switch mode power supply, and electrically it is very noisy. So at the moment we don't have it connected into the transmitter here. Let's just plug it in. I'm going to turn the volume up a little bit. Now the problem is relatively local to this. I actually suspect that most of this noise is kind of being magnetically coupled, probably from the switch mode transformer directly into the ferrite rod. So maybe that's not a completely fair comparison, but I think it just shows you that when we're using this, we need to try to keep this power supply away from our receiving radios. Now the other thing I've kind of probably noticed is that this whole talking house transmitter, it is quite powerful, and it's probably a little bit too powerful in that it puts this radio into distortion, and that isn't necessarily a fault of this transmitter. I think it's more a fault with unfortunate limitations of my room here, where we're actually running this this transmitting antenna is literally right behind the radio, so it has a tendency to overload everything. But let's go ahead and plug in our switch mode power supply, and we'll see how we get on with that. In fact, let me just try and move it as far to one side as I can. So now I've gone ahead and actually powered up our radio transmitter. It is actually doing a good job of kind of fully quietening the signal here. So we can't hear the switch mode power supply on it because the signal is strong enough. It's above the noise floor, so it's actually quieting the radio.
Thanks for listening. This message will repeat until you record your own message over it.
I've gone ahead and I've switched off the recorded message, so our transmitter's just putting out now a dead carrier, but I do appear to have kind of another problem. Now unfortunately there is a little bit of micophony coming through, and that's because our transmitter here, when you don't have it set to a pre-recorded message, it's got a microphone in it so that you can record your own message, so hopefully you can hear that. But what I wanted you to hear is, can you hear the hum? Does seem to depend how you actually hold the radio. But I have found it is possible to get rid of this hum, so if I actually just touch the top of it, the hum pretty much goes. Oh, that tingles. So yeah, I think using this particular power supply that I've used in this switch mode, I think it's probably got no ground reference, and I think that can be a problem. I'm just wondering if the actual 0 volts connection is actually connected through to ground on the old power supply. Here is the old power supply. Let's just find out if that's the case. It is indeed. Okay, so this piece of equipment is actually earthed through its power supply. So what they've actually done here is, within the enclosure here, they've taken the output from the transformer and they've actually tied the 0 volt output. They've actually connected it to the earth pin here. So this case would normally be earth reference. But if we actually take our switch mode power supply, let me unplug it. Well, we're not going to have an earth reference on this for the simple reason that the earth pin is a plastic pin. The problem is this cabinet needs to be referenced to ground to illuminate any mains hum. Now, your situation might be different. Mains hum problems can be very difficult to track down. It's got a lot to do with your installation. I have been reading through some other websites that talk about these talking house transmitters, and some people are actually fitting these with plugs that actually defeat the ground so that they actually do disconnect the earth reference, and that gets rid of the earth, the mains hum for some people, whereas other people say, well, switch the mains supply around. I can't really tell you what to do to actually cure the mains hum on your particular installation. You'll just have to play around with it, but certainly that's something to be aware of, that if you actually change the power supply from what it comes with, this one has got a reference to earth on the 0 volts, and any modern switch mode power supply that you buy is certainly not going to have that 0 volts reference to ground, not unless you create one. Now, you know, I wouldn't be opposed to actually drilling this out and maybe trying to put an earth pin in there or something, but it's not really practical. So I think what we'll do for the remainder of this test is we'll actually put my switch mode power supply on one side, because there's no point in introducing more hum than we have to, and we'll actually power it up through this step down transformer. If anybody of you are interested in these step down transformers, again, I think I bought this off Amazon. I tend to buy most of my things off Amazon because it gets delivered next day on Prime and it's relatively cheap. But I did do a review on this transformer, and if you've got some American equipment that you want to power up, I think this one is quite well made, although it does have some problems. So I made a video on these if you want to go back and have a look. So I think that I'm going to use this iPad as a signal source, and we'll try and play some license-free music or something like that and give it a listen. So just turning over, I'm just going to connect this to the line input. So this says line input 500 millivolts, and this says it's got with AGC, which is some form of automatic level control. We've got this set to live radio, so it's not going to play the message, it's going to be on live radio, which is going to take its audio source from this cable now. I'm also trying not to get this cable wrapped around the transmitting antenna and things like that. I'm trying to keep it separated if I can. And let's just plug into my iPad now. Now, although my iPad is stereo, if you're to look at the circuit for these, I believe that they have a couple of 100k resistors which they actually use, and you've got left and right channel, but the 200k's are joined at one end, so they actually they merge, they mix the left and the right channel together to produce kind of a mono input, because of course this transmitter is mono, it's not stereo. So I think for our first audio test today we'll use this Texan radio, but I'm going to move it to a different bench so it's not sat directly on top of the transmitter here, because I don't think that does it any good. It is quite a powerful transmitter, so we'll try it using this Texan, and we'll also take a listen using some other valve radios I happen to have lying around. And then what we'll do is we'll probably do a range test, and then when we've done that, let's actually plug this into some test equipment and you know, try to be a little bit more scientific and have a look at the transmitted output from it. But let's go with this first.
Log entry, U.S. rocket ship Venture. 1 hour out from Earth, destination Mars. Past Keneally heavy-side layer without incident. Rate of speed, 450,000
I've got no idea why, but turning the radio onto its back does seem to have eliminated a lot of the hum. Now, not exactly practical to maybe do with your valve radio cabinet, but certainly it seems to help with this little transistor radio.
The Columbia Network takes pleasure in bringing you suspense.
Where am I and how did I get here? And who are you?
Now, don't start that all over again.
Southwest by West 3, 1016 rising. Gently southeast by South 2, 27 miles, 1017 rising more slowly.
One of our best patrons, which only proves my contention for Jolly. A bridegroom of only 6 or 8 hours killing his wife without any reason at all.
Oh, there's usually some reason for murder.
Maybe.
What's staying or going? I think if he's a goal scorer, his record speed. All goal scorers matter, you know what they're like. They're all selfish, they always want to...
I imagine him sticking rigidly to, this is on Barry having to write 800 words in half an hour yesterday on the Grand National. I imagine him sticking rigidly to 4 letters.
So that's the radio just tuned into a normal broadcast station. You can see it isn't bringing any hum in there.
So I think we haven't managed to get Brian.
Maybe...
Here's the weather forecast for the inshore waters of Great Britain and Northern Ireland valid for the following 24 hours, issued by the Met Office at 2300 on Tuesday, the 1st of August.
Well, I'm afraid that the main problem that I've encountered so far with this home transmitter is just the amount of mains hum that we're picking up, and I think a lot of this is just the result of really quite poor RF grounding and shielding. Even doing things like putting my hands on the top of it or near to it affects the amount of mains hum. So this is probably quite a dirty RF environment. Now I think certainly some of that mains hum is actually coming in through the power wiring here. So if we actually connect, this is connected to the transformer, so a lot of the noise is actually coming in, getting into the amplifier and the modulator, and that's what we're hearing. So some of that's coming in through the wiring, but I suspect that even the antenna is equally dirty in that I've got quite a high background noise level in my house anyway. So what I think's happening is that we're getting a lot of conducted radiation, which is actually mains hum and noise, and it's actually coming into the unit via its own antenna, and once it gets into the unit it's actually, well, it's causing havoc and cross-modulating with the main signal. So I think that, again, probably just the RF design, the shielding and the grounding in this unit just isn't as good as it should be. Now I've tried all kinds of different things to reduce the hum, and I've got it a little bit better than it was. I've got this radio turned up to full volume now, and it is actually tuned in, but I can hear the hum coming from this unit now. And like I say, I've been messing around with shielding. Okay, that seems to have a slight effect. If anything, I think that makes it a little bit worse. The other thing that I've been experimenting with is I'm just going to unplug the unit, and the volume level is going to come up because this radio isn't going to be quietening. So take your headphones off if you're wearing them. So now, I don't know if you can hear, most of that hum has disappeared. I can hear very little now. Because what we're actually doing is we're running this unit off batteries. So I've got two 9-volt batteries that I've got strapped together. And I'm afraid it is loading these batteries, so it's pulling the voltage down to about 15 volts. And I have noticed that it just quite often come up with an error on here. And I think it's coming up with an error because probably the battery voltage is dropping. But the hum has pretty much gone. I think actually putting this ground on isn't actually making it hum worse. I think it's just increasing the signal level because we're introducing a ground plane into the system. But certainly now it's earthed, I'm not affecting anything. Now the other problem that I'm getting with this, again, we have got the volume turned full up on here, but I can now hear bleed through. Remember, it's got this recorded message. I can actually hear that recorded message bleeding through onto the transmitted audio. You may not be able to hear it, but I can just about hear it in the background. And we've actually in theory got the recorded message switched out now, but I'm guessing that it doesn't actually turn off the processing, the memory chip, so it's still squirting out the audio, but in theory it's diverting the audio away. But I can still hear it in the background, and certainly some of my other radios were picking up this background of this recorded message really quite loudly. So maybe what we should do is delete that message off it and just replace it with, well, just blank it so it hasn't got this in the background. So running with batteries has improved things, but at the end of the day, do you really want to buy one of these things and have to run it from batteries? We shouldn't have to do this. This is just all down to, I think, really quite poor RF design, poor RF grounding. I've got other AM transmitters which aren't as powerful as this one, but they don't suffer from all the grounding and earthing issues that this one does. So really, I think I'm quite happy to say that yes, you can make this thing work, but it's a little bit of a struggle, it's a bit of a pain. Now the other thing that I found that helps is, I think that the audio level from my iPad was a little bit too low. So what I was actually doing is I actually was using this radio as an audio source. I was just plugging into the earphone and I could actually turn the volume up a little bit. When I actually did that, I found that again, the signal level, the transmitted signal above the noise, the mains hum, was considerably improved, and it was just about workable. So another thing that I have to say about using this, you do need to use quite a high output level to actually make these things work properly. Or certainly, I haven't measured the output from my iPad, but I don't think the output from the iPad is really good enough to drive the amplifier in this properly and fully modulate the signal. So you might have to play around a bit with your signal source. If you do want to use an iPad, you might have to build a little preamplifier or something like that just to boost the actual output level. I mean, the iPad can power earphones, but it doesn't seem to be powerful enough to really fully drive this amplifier. So again, you can get this to work if you're prepared to fiddle around with it, but it certainly isn't an out-the-box solution. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back to mains power, but let's do a before and after. So before on battery, on mains, on battery, on mains.
Now you see me? Now you don't. Now you see me? Now you don't. How about that then, eh, Humphrey? How about that?